Every stage of life has its own unique concerns and worries. I mean, almost whatever age a person might be, there are particular things that they're especially concerned about, worried about. For instance, some of these very youngest kids in our assembly tonight, maybe their biggest concern is what kind of presents they're going to get on their next birthday. You know, they do a lot of planning about that and trying to pick out exactly what they want. When kids get to school age, maybe their big concern is homework assignments. You know, I can remember at being school age really fretting over an assigned book report, for instance. That was the big worry of that age, you know, make sure you get all of that done. Boy, when you get to be dating age, for those of us, aren't you glad that you're not dating age anymore? Dating age has all of its own unique kind of concerns and worries and anxieties. And then, of course, when you're married and you begin having children and rearing children, a lot of concerns, and want to make sure that that gets done right and everything is taken care of. I'm just suggesting that at whatever stage of life that you are in, there are unique concerns, worries that associate with that age. Now, having set that groundwork, let me suggest to you that those of us who are over the hill, so to speak, we have our distinct worries as well. And for a few minutes tonight, we want to talk about concerns about growing older. You know, I heard a guy describe himself as over the hill and picking up speed. And that's how it is for some of us. We've reached that stage of life. And that stage of life, like every stage of life, has its own particular distinct concerns. We want to talk for just a few minutes. We won't be long tonight, but we want to spend just a few minutes talking about that. Thanks for being here tonight. We appreciate you for coming back on Sunday night to join together to study from God's Word and to encourage one another. Cindy said as we were sitting there just before service start, with all the chatter and conversations going on, she says, it's a happy group, and it is. We're happy to be able to be together, and we're glad that you're here to be a part of it. Thanks for being here tonight. All right, what would we say about growing older? Well, I want to suggest to you, first of all, that the Bible addresses the needs of people in every stage of life. And I really want to stress that. Every stage of life. Tonight we're talking about older folks, and that's one of the stages of life. The Bible addresses that. So often we have special lessons for the young people. And in fact, from time to time, there might even be a whole special series of lessons for the young people. And I want to suggest to you that's all fair and good, but we very, very seldom ever have a lesson designed specifically for the older folks. And that's certainly a mistake. Because as we're saying here, the Bible addresses the needs of people in every stage of life. In the text that Joseph read for us earlier, just look at that one more time. Titus 2, beginning verse 1, as for you. So he's talking to Titus, and he tells Titus, here's what I want you to do. As for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith and love and in steadfastness. Older women likewise are to be reverent behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Likewise urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Well, if you look at that text, and we're going to look a little bit more at that text as our lesson develops, but certainly he addresses the younger ones. He addresses the younger women and the younger men. And again, certainly those in the younger age groups certainly deserve special attention. But you notice he also talked to the older women, and he also talked to, older men, and also to the older women. So I just want to stress that God has not overlooked the needs of anyone. Specifically for our lesson tonight, He has not overlooked the needs of older folks. I would argue and suggest to you that old age is to be honored. Now, I have to really state some conditions on making this point. I don't want to, as an old man, I don't want to sound like I'm being self-serving when I say old age should be honored. I don't mean that, because I feel like that in my case specifically, I don't feel like I'm missing out on that. Some of these younger people in attendance tonight, they've never known another preacher at College View besides me, and they treat me very well, and I appreciate that. And so I'm not making this point to beg personally for more attention. That's not my point at all. But the scriptures are really clear on the idea that older folks are supposed to be honored. And I would make this point to the young people, again, not toward me specifically, but toward older folks, and especially older folks in the local congregation. Young people honor these older folks. It's taught in the Word of God. In Leviticus 19, verse 32, you shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. I think that's kind of interesting there, that standing up before the gray head, honoring the face of the old man. Notice, it's part of fearing God. God instructs this. God, fear your God, I am the Lord, he says. So certainly it was taught under that Old Testament Mosaic age, and certainly applicable to our time today as well. Proverbs 20, verse 29. The glory of young men is their strength. The honor of old men is their gray hair. Pretty plain statement. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Paul tells Timothy, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. Older men, he said, you should treat them and relate to them as you would to a father. The older women as mothers. That's the kind of honor and respect that should be given. And young people, middle-aged people, those who are not older, should offer this kind of respect and honor to those who are older. Now, we should make a point to older folks too. Typically, we would argue you have to be respectable if you expect to be respected. And so if older folks are not living appropriately, if they're not being respectable in their conduct, then again, we shouldn't expect respect if we're not respectable. But that is a biblical point. Old age is to be honored. As a subpoint to that, I think we can say, again from the scriptures, that in regard to honoring old folks, part of that honor would be that the counsel of aged people should be sought out and respected. There's an old saying, I know you've heard a lot, I don't think it's in current usage too much, but the expression from several years ago was, been there, done that. Older folks have been there, they've done that. And so you're a teenager, know that the older folks have gone through them. If you're a young married couple, if you've got young children in your home, many of the older folks have been there, they've done that, they've gone through that. If you're middle-aged and you're going through some of the things that pertain to middle-aged issues, the older folks have done that. And so seek out the counsel of respected older people. Seek it out and respect it. I don't know if you saw a quote in the bulletin today. I was particularly taken by it. It said, smart people learn from their own mistakes. Smarter people learn from the mistakes of others. I thought that was pretty well said. You don't have to repeat every mistake that everybody else has already made. So here's an older person, and I could say this for myself. Here I am. I've been down that road. I've made some mistakes along that road. If you ask me, I could tell you what some of those mistakes were. If you're facing some challenges or decisions or issues in life, and you ask a person like me, I can say, well, I had something very similar, and I did the wrong thing when faced with those challenges. Here's what not to do, right? And so you don't have to repeat the mistakes that everybody else has made before you. You might learn from them and avoid those mistakes. I think the classic example of someone who failed to seek out And, well, he actually did seek out the advice of older people, but he didn't respect it and he didn't honor it, was Rehoboam. You know this story very well. In 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning verse 6, Rehoboam consulted with the older men. So he actually did. And it may have just been a formality, I think, maybe in this case. He consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived and said, "How do you advise that I may answer the people?" Remember, the people said, "You need to lower our taxes. Your father just wearing us out with the tax bill, and if you would lower the taxes, we will gladly serve you." And so he says, he asked the old men, "How do you think I should answer the people?" And they spake unto him, saying, "If thou wilt be a servant to this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever." Notice, but he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. And you remember that the young men said, "Man, lay it on heavier. Just tell him whatever your father did was nothing compared to what you're about to do. Just put it on them, make it hard on them." And he listened to that. He didn't listen to the sound advice of the older men. The advice of the older men was the right advice, but he listened to the advice of his young contemporaries, and he answered the people harshly, and the nation was split. And there was never a recovery from the mistake that he made there. But his problem was that he did not properly respect the counsel that the older men had given him, and he could have spared himself a lot of trouble if he did. Look again at Titus 1. Now this is back to that text that Joseph read for us in Titus 1. Notice here that it says that the older women, they are to teach what is good and train the younger women. So this is a part of God's plan, that older folks give advice and counsel and instruction to those who are younger. God plans that. He has stated that in His Word. A couple of questions that we could ask here. Are older folks, in this instance older women, but I would include older men too, are you willing to accept that responsibility? And then younger folks, are you seeking it out? Are you benefiting from this resource? Even in a congregation like College View here, we have a resource of older folks, older experienced people who've been through a lot of the challenges that life throws in your way. Will you be wise enough to seek that counsel and benefit from it? So again, old age is to be honored in general, and specifically, I think the counsel of respected older people should be sought out and followed. I would argue that there are unique trials and temptations associated with old age. And a lot of the things that older folks deal with, younger people can't quite imagine it yet. I was talking to Paul McLean as he's coming in. He's still having that trouble with that bad knee, and he's looking forward to getting that knee fixed. Says can't get comfortable in bed with his knee aching all the time. I know what he means. You don't know. You kids don't know what he means. But those of us who are older, we know what he means when he says that. And so we're saying there are some unique trials and temptations associated with old age. The very famous text on this is concerning the infirmities of the body or health issues. The very famous text on that is Ecclesiastes Chapter 12. Look at that. I love this passage because it's so plainly, in sort of poetic terms, describes what goes on as you get older. He says in Ecclesiastes 12, beginning verse 3, "In the day when the keepers of the house tremble." Well, what are the keepers of the house? Most people think that's your hands. And you see older people and when they're not doing anything, their hands just sit there and tremble like that. And so the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent. Most agree that this is a description of the legs that sort of bow out and bend and are sort of worn down through the age and all the loads that have been carried. The strong men are bent. The grinders cease because they are few. That's almost certainly a reference to the teeth, right? We should be glad that we live in a day when dental hygiene has really advanced, and old people go to their graves many times these days with their own natural teeth, but that was not so. It was absolutely not so in generations past. And almost all older people had to have false teeth because they didn't have their natural teeth anymore. The grinders cease because they are few. Those who look through the windows are dimmed. That's got to be a reference to your eyesight, right? So as we grow older, our eyesight dims. Here again, we can be grateful that lots of advances have been made in all kinds of technology related to the eye. Many of you know that I just recently went through cataract surgery, which has given me effectively 20/20 vision, at least at a distance. I still have to wear reading glasses. But man, think about generations past that didn't have that. They got cataracts, or maybe they got glaucoma, or who knows what else that was not even diagnosable, and their vision dimmed and they went blind. Remember in the Old Testament when Isaac was deceived by Jacob because his eyesight had failed. He was effectively blind, and he couldn't tell that it wasn't Esau who was before him, it was Jacob who was before him, and Jacob deceived him into receiving the blessing because his eyes had dimmed. But that goes with old age for sure. He says, and it says, the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low. Now that's a little more curious, but most people think that's describing a toothless mouth. And so to sort of hide the shame of having lost all of his natural teeth, he keeps his lips kind of firmly closed, the doors of the street. When the sound of the grinding is low, probably he's keeping his mouth pretty tightly shut because he's lost all of his teeth. One rises up at the sound of a bird. In old age, he can't sleep well. He has very restless night. And any slight thing wakes him, and then he can't go back to sleep, right? And so he rises at the sound of a bird. All the daughters of song are brought low. This is probably a reference to the hearing and probably also the voice. You know, as we get older, many older people have a lot of trouble with their vocal cords and their voice. Certainly a lot of older people have trouble with their hearing. That's the daughters of song being brought low. They are afraid also of what is high. I can attest to that. I give personal testimony to that. I look around my house and I think of some of the things that I've done in the past, climbing up way up on a ladder to fix something on the roof or do something. Well, you couldn't get me to do that now for anything. I'm old. I'm afraid of high places now. I'm afraid of high places that I wasn't afraid of. Maybe I should have been, but I wasn't in time past. And so being afraid of what is high is a characteristic of old age. There are terrors in the way. When we get old, we begin to fret and worry about things we wouldn't even thought about. So years ago, someone said, let's go to Nashville tonight. Oh, Nashville, are you kidding? Man, it's almost dark out there. You know? Some car could break down. Could be a wreck on the road. I'm not starting out for Nashville at this time of night. Years ago, someone said, let's go to Nashville. You would have said, hey, yeah, let's go. Let's go right now. Let's get going. Terrors in a way. We begin to worry more about that sort of thing than we would have. The almond tree blossoms. Again, that's almost certainly a reference to the gray hair. The grasshopper drags itself along. A burden, a load that used to would have been like nothing. You wouldn't even thought about it. Now it's a load. Even you think of a grasshopper, which you just envision it being so light on his feet. Now the grasshopper is a burden, and he wouldn't have been before. The desire fails. Physical desires fail in old age. Why? Why is this so? Because man is going to his eternal home. He's approaching death. I like the King James there. I almost use the King James Version here instead of the English Standard. The King James Version says man is going to his long home. What's his long home? His long home is his coffin, right? It's where they lay him out. That's his long home. The English Standard says he's going to his eternal home. The reason why all of these symptoms are there, because we're getting old. And there's infirmity associated with old age. God knows that. And Solomon wrote about it in I think really neat poetic terms here in the book of Ecclesiastes. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16, Paul says, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day." What's happening to us? As we get older, what's happening to us? Our outer self is wasting away. That's just true. And that's inevitable. And that's happening. I mean, for all of us at any age, we're getting older day by day. But for those of us who are old already, we could say, yeah, it's true. Our outer self is wasting away. We can't stop that. We can't avoid that. That's inevitable. Just make sure this part is true. Make sure the inner self is being renewed day by day. That's what we got to be sure is taking place. And so some of the unique trials and temptations associated with age include infirmity of the body. That just happens, doesn't it? That's true. We know that that's true. I think also we would argue that as we get older, character flaws can be amplified. And I think all of us have known older people and we've seen that happen. And those of us who are older got to be really on guard against it. I remember my grandmother, who was quite an influence in my life, but she was a strong spiritual person, but she was really outspoken. And I'm telling you, if it was on her mind, you knew it. She would say so. I mean, the filter was off. And whatever came to mind came out of her mouth. And sometimes she would say some things that were pretty hurtful. You may have someone like that in your family or some older person that you know. And again, the filter is off. They say anything that comes to mind. Those kind of character flaws can be amplified in old age, often are. And we need to be careful. I would argue also that a character flaw like self-centeredness begins to manifest itself. And how many times have we known older people and they're not thinking about anybody else's needs? They're only concerned about self and what can be done for me right now. So self-centeredness is a character flaw, a sinful one, but it can be amplified as we get older. In Ephesians chapter 4, you know this passage very well. Ephesians 4, beginning verse 31. "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you." That's a passage that we all need to know by heart and apply on a daily basis. But I think it needs special attention by those of us who are older. I certainly fail in that too many times. Another unique thing about old age is the reality that Satan can use some of these particular aspects of growing older. Satan can use that against us. Spiritual dangers can continue throughout life. Never imagine that Satan has relaxed his efforts against you spiritually. He does not do that, and he will not do that, no matter how old you are. In fact, it is, I think, true that Satan has some new avenues to approach you as you get older. There's some things about old age that Satan can use to get at you spiritually that wouldn't have been a problem to you when you were younger. You didn't even have that issue. But now that you are older, you have this issue, and Satan will use that. He'll use whatever weakness he can detect at whatever age you are. And so do not imagine that the spiritual dangers are over. Look at 1 Kings chapter 11. We mentioned Solomon a minute ago. Look at this. You know this story is a sad one, isn't it? 1 Kings 11, beginning verse 4. "When Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done." Isn't that something? Here's Solomon, who was blessed with extreme wisdom, and yet when he was old, Satan used that and got at him, and Solomon did not wholly follow the Lord as did David his father. I want to just suggest to all of us who are older, be aware and know that the spiritual dangers are still out there. In fact, new ones that maybe we haven't experienced in our youth are coming our way. Satan is not giving up on us even when we are old. Finally, let me say that the elderly can still bear fruit for the Lord. I think you would quickly agree with me when I say there's no stated retirement age for Christians. There's no time when we can say, okay, I'm done now. I'm going to retire. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to retire from my Christian duties. I'm going to retire from the work that I can do as a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. There is no retirement age for Christians. And the elderly can still bear fruit for the Lord. Psalm 92, verse 13 beginning. Psalm 92, 13. Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing. So here's those who are planted in the house of the Lord. What can be true of them? They can still bring forth fruit in old age. We ought to be doing that. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about the fat business, you know. I don't know if that's, well, I don't think we have to dwell on that. I know what he means here, they be fat and flourishing, is that they continue to be blessed by God. That's what that expression means, right? But I really like this. They can still bring forth fruit in old age. And that's what ought to be our goal, no matter how old we are. If you young people, you ought to say, I'm going to serve the Lord now, and I'm going to serve the Lord through my life. And when I get old, I'm going to still be serving the Lord. That ought to be your complete goal and devotion. But those of us who are already older know that we can still bring forth fruit for the Lord. Caleb is a great character study, and we talked about him recently in a Wednesday night class. So Caleb is an example of someone older who kept doing all that he could in service to the Lord. In Joshua 14, beginning of verse 10, now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, Caleb says, just as he said, these 45 years. Now stop there for a minute. Think about the 45 years. Now, I think to get to that 45 number, what he's talking about is the 40 years of wilderness wandering, and then 5 years thereafter during the time of conquest in the promised land. And so the 45 years, so you remember what happened. God punished the Israelites for their lack of faith when they first approached the promised land. They sent the spies in. The spies came back. The 10 spies gave that report, said it's a great land, but we can't ever take it because there's giants there and they got great walled cities, and we felt like grasshoppers in their sight. And we think they thought we were grasshoppers. We would just never be able to take the land. And the people believed that report, and they wouldn't go, and so God made them wander in the wilderness. And everybody, at that point, everybody who was 20 years and older would die during the 40 years of wilderness wanderings, except Joshua and Caleb, right? And so he says, God has kept me alive 45 years. I think that's the 40 years of wilderness wandering, the 5 years of conquest in Canaan. Now they're divvying up the land. And so he speaks of while Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I am this day 85 years old. So put that together. 45, and he says he's 85 now. So he was 40, right? When he was sent as a spy into the promised land, he was 40. Everybody 20 years and older died except him and Joshua. So if he was 40 at that point in time, then he's at least 20 years older than anybody else in Israel at this point, right? He's at least 20 years older than anybody else. What's he asking for? He said, I'm still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. So now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me. Then Joshua blessed him, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. So he says, okay, I want my inheritance now. And I'll tell you what part I want. I want that part where the giants are. He didn't say, just give me some little place here where there won't be any challenge. He was still wanting a big challenge. He said, give me the place where the giants are. I'll root them out. Let me have that place. And again, he stands as a tremendous example of someone older, still bearing fruit for the Lord. In Philemon, verse 9, there's only one chapter in Philemon. Philemon, verse 9, it says, Paul says to Philemon, "For love's sake I rather beseech thee, being such a one as Paul the aged, and now also a prisoner of Jesus Christ." Remember just recently when on Wednesday night we were studying the prison epistles? Philemon is one of those prison epistles written from Rome during Paul's first Roman imprisonment. And he actually was telling Philemon, make a place ready for me. I think I want to get out and I want you to have a place for me when I come there. But notice he refers to himself as Paul the aged. But when we were studying those prison epistles, we noted that even while he was a prisoner in Rome, he was still preaching and teaching and converting people. He was still bearing fruit in old age. And so I think there are unique concerns and things to pay attention to at every stage of life. But for those who are older, there are certainly some unique things to think about. And I hope our thoughts tonight have been helpful along that line. Finally, let's conclude with Psalm 90, verse 10 beginning. In the days of our years are 70. So typically life expectancy then was 70 years old. And if by reason of strength they be 80, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Kind of interesting that from then till now, and we're talking about 3,000 sort of years. From then till now, life expectancy hasn't changed all that tremendously much. He was saying typical life expectancy might be 70, and if you're particularly strong-willed or strong, you have a strong constitution, you might make it to 80, but you're gonna be cut off. You're gonna die. That's just what happens. So know that old age is coming, and you're going to be cut off. You're going to fly away. What's important then? So teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Help us to realize the things that are inevitably true about life and the reality of the fact that we're going to grow old and die, and help us keep our eye on the goal of heaven, because in the end, that's all that really matters, right? Thanks for your good attention to what I've had to say, and hope that it's helpful, especially maybe for those of us who are older. Some of the instructions of God's Word for those of us with the gray hair. All right? Thanks for listening. We're going to sing a song of invitation. If you need our help making your life right with God, either by obeying the gospel initially, or if you need the prayers and help of the Christians here to be restored to a right relationship with God, let us know how we can help while we stand and sing.